I would like to introduce you to our second keynote speaker, Dean Menon, who is joining us from St. Joseph University in Philadelphia. However, many of you might know Professor Menon or Dean Menon because she is back to GVSU for this presentation. And I'm so happy and so honored to introduce you, Shaily, today. So Shaily spent almost 18 years at Grand Valley, first as a faculty member, as a chair of biology department, as associate dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Science. And in fact, I wanted to share that this summit, this Climate Change Education Solutions Summit, is a direct result of her efforts to advance interdisciplinary collaboration and interdisciplinary education at the College of Liberal Arts and Science. So it's a double honor to greet you today as a speaker, and it's a double honor to welcome you to the event, which is really the result, the product of your great work at Grand Valley.
Thank you, Elena. What a wonderful introduction. I'm really touched. Thank you also for putting together this exciting event on solutions for climate change education and for inviting me to join you. It's such an honor to follow Mayor Hartwell's poignant description of teaching wholly and as holy work, and Jos Jusen's thought-provoking ideas and his description of teachers and school students engaging the future. You'll find some parallels of their themes in my talk. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon and for the opportunity to share some thoughts about higher education and liberal arts and sciences in the context of climate disruption. As Elena mentioned, my areas of teaching and research, they're listed there: conservation biology, environmental ethics, spatial modeling. This map is just one example of research from ecological forecasting, which shows that with a doubling of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, all the low elevation and medium elevation forests in Asia, shown in blue here, will not survive. Only the higher elevation forests will survive. So as you can imagine, this will have really serious effects for the plants, animals, and humans who live in those low-lying areas. My starting premise for this talk is that in this audience today, we're all convinced about the reality of climate change. So except for sharing a few stark reminders of events that happened just in the last few months of this year, I won't preach to the choir by sharing data to make the case for climate disruption. What I will do instead is to keep students at the center of my talk and share these ideas: that the world that our students are facing and are likely to face in the future will be increasingly complex and uncertain. That while scientific understanding is key, it cannot offer all the solutions without collaboration with other disciplines. That education should prepare students to be nimble and adaptable in an increasingly complex world, and that interdisciplinary approaches and experiential learning, which is grounded in liberal education, can prepare them for an uncertain future. Like other speakers in today's summit, I would like to make a call for action, for us to think of new ways about education and approaches that are relevant for students in the 21st century. As Elena mentioned, I'm in my fourth year as Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia. And before that, I was at GVSU for almost 20 years, serving in many different positions. So I have a lot of affection for the people here and great memories of my time at the university. In 2011, I gave a keynote address at a faculty award ceremony at Grand Valley. And during that talk, I shared information about the evidence of our changing climate through more frequent and intense storms. This is a NASA image of a hurricane that went across the United States just the day before I gave that talk in 2011. And the audience gasped when they saw this image of the eye of the storm approaching the country. I shared predictions of sea level rise and pointed out areas that would be completely inundated by a projected 6-meter rise. I shared about an island whose ownership was contested, but had already disappeared thus resolving that political quandary. An underwater cabinet meeting held by the president of the Maldives to underscore the imminent and existential threat of sea level rise to island nations, and about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, large enough to form an island, and also about microplastics that are killing life in the ocean. I'm sad to say that things didn't get any better in the intervening decade. Some of you may be familiar with this description of the world that our students will face, a VUCA world, a world that is increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Volatile because the challenges are unexpected and unstable, uncertain because information is either not available or is unpredictably available, complex because of multiple forces that are interconnected and interdependent, ambiguous because even when information is available, the overall meaning is unclear. Just this summer, we witnessed catastrophic wildfires across the world. In addition to wildfires that swept across the West in the US, there were raging fires in many other parts of the world. The vast Pantanal wetland in Brazil is one of the most biodiverse places on Earth, with breathtaking wildlife, including migrating birds, jaguars, tapirs, endangered giant otters, hyacinth macaws. Roughly a quarter of the Pantanal burned this year. This area is used to naturally occurring fires and fires that ranchers have used to clear fields. In other years, those fires would have been contained by the water in the landscape mosaic. But extreme drought due to climate change turned the area into a tinderbox, and the fires blazed out of control. Firefighters and volunteers scrambled to rescue jaguars and other animals from the extreme fires. The other place that had a black summer was Australia. Australia had the hottest and driest year on record, with relentless heat and drought, which led to the rest of its native forest going up in smoke. The koala, which has been described as Australia's most emblematic species, now faces extinction by as early as 2050. More than 3 billion animals were either burned, incinerated, or displaced while the bushland burned. The bushland is beloved to the people of Australia. It is a part of its mythology, a place of story, a place of reflection and contemplation, and it has changed in ways that people who love it are only beginning to understand. Even the Arctic Circle did not escape this summer. Wildfires incinerated the tundra, and Siberian cities were covered in smoke. Peatlands are carbon-rich soils that accumulate as plants decay slowly, waterlogged plants. It takes a long time, over thousands of years, making it a very carbon-dense ecosystem, perhaps the most carbon-dense on Earth. So when peat burns, it releases ancient carbon into the atmosphere, adding to the heat-trapping greenhouse gases that cause climate change. Last year, the peatland fires had already set a record. By the end of August this year, the fire had put out a record 244 megatons of carbon dioxide, 35% more than last year. This is a lot of bad news from one summer in 1 year during a pandemic. This period of Earth's history is now referred to by some as the Anthropocene, defined by its profound and pervasive human influences. Earl Ellis and some colleagues have suggested that human systems are such a force of nature that they rival the climatic and geological forces in shaping the terrestrial biosphere and its processes. So they propose that since much of the Earth has been altered by humans, we should get rid of the outdated concept of biomes and instead have a new concept of anthromes, or anthropogenic biomes. At one level, Ellis seems to urge humans to take responsibility for the mess we find ourselves in. However, in promoting the new map and concept of postnaturalism, we find such provocative phrases as I've listed here, including the war with nature is over and we won. If for a moment we ignore the hubris in these statements, then we are faced with a series of difficult questions. Now what? How will we wage the peace after winning the war with nature? We would do well to remember words of wisdom that people like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Ernest Boyer and others have shared, the end of the human race will be that it will eventually die of civilization, and that the disaster is the divorce of competence from conscience. We could ask, what is the cost of carbon, and can we bear it? Can nature bear it? Can humans bear it? Can we instead imagine a post-carbon world? We can ask, whose nature is it that we are challenging and mastering? Rachel Carson told us many years ago that the human race is challenged more than ever before to demonstrate our mastery, not over nature, but over ourselves. We can consider that while scientific understanding is key, it cannot offer all solutions, and it needs collaboration with other disciplines. The shift in the larger narrative from climate change to climate justice frames it as an ethical and political issue rather than a purely physical or scientific one. This framework invites other disciplines to the conversation and helps us see a collective path forward. It takes away the focus from only the science and breaks the paralysis of climate change. Mary Robinson, author of this book on climate justice and former president of Ireland, describes climate justice as insisting on a shift from a discourse on greenhouse gases and melting ice caps into a civil rights movement with the people and communities most vulnerable to climate impacts at its heart. Greta Thunberg is emblematic of the anxiety and activism of this generation of students. It was an anxious time for them before the pandemic, and now even more so. Students are deeply aware of the challenges ahead and are concerned for their futures. As Jos said this morning, they are the future. The relevance of their learning to their future careers and lives is more important to them than ever before. They are eager to make a difference, to be part of the solution, to shape the world that they will inhabit. As a faculty member, I spent a lot of time with my advisees and students in classes who are trying to discover the work that they are meant to do in their lives. I remember one student in an introductory natural resource management class met with me in my office as part of a class assignment, requiring students to reflect on how they could best prepare for a career. It was this student's first semester. He had not yet declared a major. He was not sure a major was available that was a good fit for his career interests. So naturally, I asked him to tell me about what he wanted to do in life. He told me about his interest in nature and the outdoors. He said, I don't know what job I would do, but it would be something related to the environment. He said, so far in this class, we've been learning about the ecology of aquatic ecosystems and wetlands, but I don't know if I should be spending time learning about this. You see, he said, I don't want to save just one wetland. And he said this earnestly and a bit desperately. I want to save the world. We were silent for a few moments as his words sank in, and the expression on his face slowly changed from confusion to realization. I asked gently, and how would you go about saving the world? He grinned sheepishly and said, one wetland at a time? He stayed in class and did outstanding work. These are the aha moments we want our students to have. But the point of the story is not that we need to limit our students' thinking, but rather that the hard work and disciplinary knowledge and skills will be necessary, even as we learn to work in interdisciplinary collaborative teams to solve local and global problems. We live in a time when many of our most cherished institutions and values are under attack. The free press, scientific inquiry, inclusiveness and respect for people regardless of age, race, gender, sexual orientation, disability, or immigration status, civil discourse, the pursuit of knowledge and respect for expertise, and higher education, especially the liberal arts. It is a time that puts misplaced emphasis almost exclusively on the private good rather than the public purposes of higher education. In the absence of a clear vocational focus, the liberal arts are deemed impractical and of little value. I would argue that now more than ever, our world needs the skills and social values cultivated by a liberal education, Now more than ever, our nation needs publicly engaged citizens committed to the work of social justice. Now our community, our nation, our world needs persons prepared to think critically about the evidence before them, persons prepared to problem solve in the midst of the unfamiliar, agile thinkers with a broad base of knowledge from which to question, analyze, and respond more thoughtfully to an increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. We all know that an education in the liberal arts prepares students not for their first job, but for a lifetime of learning, for jobs that don't yet exist and haven't even been imagined. A liberal arts education allows us to further the ideals of integrating contemplation and action, so students have well-developed and reflective minds, alongside a desire to work towards a more sustainable, just, and humane world. So we can ask the question, where is higher education headed? This article talks about a survey that asked higher education leaders recently for their views on where higher education is headed. And it says that for many higher education leaders, this unimaginable moment of time, a seismic shift forced by the COVID-19 pandemic, has offered a chance for reflection and a need to look ahead. For better or worse, change has meant shattering boundaries, breaking from long-standing traditions, and facing the mirror, and Zoom cameras too. For some, 2020 is the end of an era. For others, it is only the beginning. They must make hard decisions about their institution's future and the future of their students. One of the presidents who was part of the survey is president of the California Community College System, Eloy Oakley. And he said that the movement over the last 10 to 15 years to democratize access to higher education is going to win out. And that competencies, giving people opportunities, will hold power. It's going to force us to rethink how we organize and rethink what we value. Another president, David Thomas, president of Morehouse College, a private historically Black college and university that serves 2,200 students, has produced leaders like Martin Luther King, said we will have to address the issues of affordability and accessibility. He said the reality is that everybody entering the workforce today will have to be re-educated within the next 20 years because the world we're moving into, in that world, half the jobs that exist today won't exist by 2050, and we don't know what the new ones will be. So rather than simply reaching for more facts, we need to help students grapple with the complexity of emotions around climate disruption. I get excited about satellite imagery and advances such as the ability to map every tree on Earth. Can you imagine? But the question that arises is, what good will such a map be if, like dead stars, these trees are only reminders of what once was? The challenges we face today are increasingly in the category of wicked problems. Wicked problems have complex interdependencies, they defy simple solutions. Students are aware of these challenges. They're eager to make a difference. And solving such problems will require us to transcend disciplinary thinking and develop the ability to work collaboratively in multidisciplinary teams without losing the integrity of disciplinary knowledge. To prepare students for the future, we will need to help them transcend the myopic mindset that puts on disciplinary blinkers and ignores the forest for the trees. We will need to guide the student to ask, why must I take classes that have nothing to do with my major? We are called to innovate and reinvent ourselves so our students will not only have productive careers, but also meaningful lives in an uncertain future. We see examples of this kind of thinking. Funding agencies are inviting collaboration. Humanities Without Walls is a project funded by the Menon Foundation and has looked at climate change from interdisciplinary perspectives. Researchers are increasingly relying on data collected by citizen scientists and bird watchers, for example, to better understand the effects of climate change, including wildfires, on bird populations. So when the historic wildfires raged across California, Oregon, and Washington, birds may have been forced to rush their migration, and which could have been the cause of the mass bird die-off this year. So scientists, because they can't be everywhere, but they need access to this information, invited scientists to log bird deaths on a platform called iNaturalist, which is collaborative. One person loads the picture, scientists comment on identification, the data is geotagged, and it gives scientists access to much more location of data than they would have otherwise. In reimagining how we engage students, let us be bold and consider redesigning our curricula and student experiences. Rather than be constrained by disciplinary silos, let us organize our programs and even our institutions around large themes that are place-based, involve the community, and are action-oriented for sustainable futures. Let us invite students to apply knowledge from the classroom to finding solutions that make a difference in their local and global communities. Let us create collaborative research groups of faculty and students using interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary lenses to seek solutions for a post-carbon society. Not only in well-researched large research universities, but also in small local colleges and community colleges. And all of this grounded in the values of liberal education. To give you just a couple of examples, specific examples of work that I have done in this area, I'll talk about 5 interdisciplinary research clusters that started after a call to action that I gave at the talk I mentioned in 2011. The original clusters, designed to be broad-ranging and inclusive of many disciplines, were borders, brain, health, urban, and water. Based on faculty interest, we added a 6th cluster called digital shortly before I left Grand Valley. And I was delighted to learn from Elena, as she shared earlier, that this summit is funded by a grant from this initiative. So it's an excellent example of the vision that led to this call to action. As Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at St. Joseph's University, I reached out to community partners in Philadelphia. And together with Global Philadelphia Association, Mural Arts, which murals are a big tradition in Philadelphia, and also an adjoining school called Samuel Gomper School, we're working on a mural art project in which 2 sister murals will be installed in dialogue with each other and created by local Philadelphia muralists. And there will be a lot of public programming planned in association with the art. It will be one of 17 such murals because there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals all across Philadelphia. Another initiative I helped after I arrived at St. Joe's, and this was working together with faculty and alumni, was to house a biotech startup in one of our labs with the condition that our students would have access and opportunity to get hands-on experience with entrepreneurship, translational medicine, and cancer research. So 10 of our students got exactly that opportunity during the year or so that the startup was housed in one of our labs. Subsequently, as one would hope for startups, although it's never a guarantee because more startups fail than succeed, but in this case, this is a happy story where the startup went on, the ideas really worked for very novel humoral immunological responses to cancer treatment. And they went on to get venture capital and went to bigger spaces. And I'm happy to say, so this was a Philadelphia Business Journal article about this startup incubator that we were housing. And the most recent update, I'm happy to say, is that the company has signed a commercial license agreement with the National Cancer Institute to develop next generation therapies. So for us and our students to be able to say that they were part of a startup venture that may result in novel cures for cancer is an amazing kind of partnership. Another project that before I talk about one more project, I want to mention that we know what we need to work on. As Yas said this morning, the work we need to do is not complicated. We know what we need to do. We need to rewild degraded areas. We know we need to wean ourselves from carbon and fossil fuels and create renewable sources of energy. We know we need a new environmental ethic for how we will live our lives and live together in and with nature, rather than waging war against nature. We can't wait around for politicians and policymakers to settle their differences and then see finally what is clear for all to see. We are educators. We're part of historic institutions and a storied tradition. Our students are looking up to us, depending on us. So this last initiative that I want to share is about a new initiative that we're launching at St. Joe's. It's a social innovation fellows program where students will work in groups together with faculty to learn how to be creative problem solvers, social innovators, entrepreneurs, and integrators. They will participate in collaborative and interdisciplinary projects, working with corporate and nonprofit community partners, creating solutions for real-world and socially relevant problems. And so the next time Elena invites me, I can give an update on how this initiative is going. So let me end with some words from a climate scientist who wrote an essay as part of a series of essays by Australian writers responding to the challenges of 2020. So Joelle Gurgis said in her essay, "As a climate scientist at this troubled time in human history, my hope is that the life force of our Earth can hang on, that the personal and collective awakening we need to safeguard our planet arrives before even more is lost, that our hearts will lead us back to our shared humanity, strengthening our resolve to save ourselves and our imperiled world. Let us help young people create a more hope-filled future." Thank you.